come in, despite the summons, if we sent them an invitation. So we also sent an invitation following the summons. Now, why is it that the people that I was told were going to appear, suddenly somebody had decided not to come on Friday? Can you tell us what the reasons you were given, Clerk?
Well, that would be a more appropriate question for the witnesses than myself.
No, but you were informed. You were told as a clerk that Mr. Clegg was not coming. What was the reason given? Mike?
Yeah. Well, to begin with, a summons for a sovereign citizen of another country has no effect from this committee. So there's that. So that was relayed back to me from Meta that there wasn't a need to abide by the conditions of a summons because it had no effect.
This is your wake-up call.
This Guy's Garage. Like and subscribe.
3 weeks ago, Bill C-11 was rammed through the Senate. There were amendments suggested originally, but they weren't taken by this government. And then it was sent over to the Senate, and the Senate did not give it the sober second thought that it deserved yet again. So it got pushed through. It now gives this government unprecedented power to control what people can see or say or hear online. And then at the Liberals convention this weekend, they put through another intention, a proposal, and that is that they would actually regulate news sources. So basically, the state would have to approve a journalist's news source. And if the government gives that news source a stamp of approval, then that article can be published. And if the government, through the CRTC, I would imagine, doesn't give that stamp of approval, then of course that article would not be publishable. It's a form of censorship. It's a form of censorship. Now, what's interesting is that a journalist, Paul Wells, who traditionally is very liberal, very, very much inside the pockets of the Liberals, he wrote an article on Friday outlining what's happening here. And he said this. He said, "It is impossible for any government to subsidize journalism without deciding at some early point to exercise its prerogative as an owner." What's interesting is that this government has funded the media to the tune of about $600 million. And so as the owner of much of the media here in Canada, now of course there are many fantastic independent sources and alternative sources of media, but the mainstream tends to be largely owned by the government because they're the ones that are keeping them afloat or propping them up with this massive amount of grant money. Now, it would appear, based on their convention, that the Liberals are looking to cash in on this. They're looking to exert their power. Some might call it bullying. In fact, I believe that is how many members of this committee have referred to it when power is misused. It's called bullying.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Little.
I don't expect a question in the near future. Just want to clarify that things that are passed at a convention aren't government policy. Those are things by members, and just clarify for people who are listening at home.
Thank you, Mr. Little. Continue, Ms. Thomas.
I believe that was debate. And so having this policy then passed at convention, which often then makes it to the floor of the House of Commons and then of course impacts Canadians, is concerning. It's concerning, yes, to Paul Wells and to other journalists, because of course it would be an infringement on their ability to function as, well, journalists, which Ms. Hefner often talks about the fact that they're so incredibly trained and should be trusted to tell the stories that they research. And so I'm confused as to why this government wouldn't trust them to tell those stories without first needing to give a state stamp of approval as to their sources. But nevertheless, this government has managed to turn into a bully because they own part of the media. In the same way, Facebook is being put in a position where, or Meta is being put in a position where they will have to enter into contracts, monetary contracts with news sources, which then gives Facebook or Meta an incredible amount of power as well. And it would appear then that they are also using that power to make decisions that have a detrimental impact on Canadians. So I actually see two peas in a pod. I see two sources of tremendous power dictating to Canadians what's going to happen in terms of access to news. I'm curious as to what you would make of that.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Ms. Thomas. Look, we have always, part of our concerns with the Online News Act, with Bill C-18, is the fact that it ties the fate and the fortunes of the Canadian news sector to the fortunes of two American technology companies. And we think that's one of the major flaws, in fact, with the legislation, as you've stated, that it makes the news sector almost entirely dependent on foreign technology companies. So that is one of the points of concern that we have with this piece of legislation.
I guess I just need some further help, though, knowing why is it in the fate of these, why is it in the hands of these two giants?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Ms. Thomas. That is the way the legislation is drafted, and that's certainly what the minister has indicated also, that this legislation is intended to apply to two American technology companies, to Google and to Meta. Now, I understand there may be some room to scope in other platforms or other technology companies, but for now, very clearly it's directed at Google and at Meta.
Now, it's my understanding that you've entered into several agreements already. Does Meta intend to uphold those agreements or pull from them?
Well, ma'am, I don't know that we have an answer for that. Of course, it depends on what the framework for C-18 will ultimately be. And so we have to understand what is scoped in within C-18 to understand what can and cannot be ultimately on the platform from a news content point of view.
So I'm curious then, for Facebook to continue to carry news and to continue forward with these deals that have been sprung, I think it's 14 or something like that, I'm wondering then, what is required? What is required in terms of legislative change? I mean, right now, Bill C-18 is in the Senate. It's possible to have amendments made. What should those amendments be?
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. So we have proposed a list of amendments both to this committee and to the Senate. Sorry, Madam Chair?
You speak through the chair, thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, Madam Chair. Yes, we have proposed a list of amendments to this committee and to the Senate committee looking at the bill. One of the primary concerns we have with the bill and amendments we have proposed is to scope out what we call publisher-posted content. So content that's posted voluntarily by news publishers, whether in written text format in the form of hyperlinks or audio-visual content to our platforms. And if that were scoped out of the Act, if publisher-posted content were removed from the scope of the Act, we think it would make it a much better piece of legislation. So that is one of the primary amendments we've proposed.
Witnesses, I'm going to be asking a couple of questions that can be answered by yes or no, or I don't know. Feel free to do yes, no, I don't know. And if I ask you to expand, feel free to expand, okay? My first question is, Mr. Chen, did you encourage Mr. Clegg not to come here today?
I believe this was his decision.
Did you have any role in that?
Well, of course, I'm an advisor to our president, so of course I would be part of that decision.
And did you agree with that? Did the advice that you gave correspond to his decision?
Well, as all good advisors will do with a former deputy prime minister, you'll appreciate that we will keep that my advice confidential, so that I may be fearless in my advice, and he is the decider.
Has Meta's board of directors discussed the content blocking decision that you've made in the event C-18 is adopted?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Could you repeat it?
Has Meta's board of directors discussed the proposed content blocking in Canada if C-18 is adopted? I can't hear your answer, Mr. Chen.
Oh, I said I don't know.
You don't know. Was the decision to do content blocking in Canada if C-18 was adopted made exclusively by the Canadian team?
I think there were a number of people involved. I mean, I'm not really part of the Canadian team anymore, as you appreciate, but I think this is concerning on a global level. I don't think, and as I said in the opening statement, we haven't seen any democracy make an attempt to put a value on links, which is concerning.
Mr. Chan, I'm reclaiming my time. If you can answer questions yes or no, I'm asked you to do that. So Mr. Clegg was involved in that decision, yes or no?
President of Global Affairs, he would have been.
Mr. Zuckerberg, was he involved in the decision, yes or no? He was?
I don't know.
You don't know. Okay. I'm going to focus my questions going forward on the Australian activities of a couple of years ago. Per the Wall Street Journal's reporting of whistleblower documents, Facebook deliberately overblocked Australian Emergency Services health and government pages as part of its news takedown. So I'm going to focus on what I've heard from Facebook whistleblowers in these documents. One of the things that whistleblowers stated was the Australian takedown was carefully planned over months. And as the bill was tabled in the second half of 2020, so many, many months before the eventual decision, Facebook created a special team of product staff and engineers to deal with the content blocking scheme. Has a content blocking team for Canada been created, Mr. Chen?
I'm not aware.
Ms. Curran, are you aware?
Yeah, I can answer that. Thank you, Mr. Housefather, through the chair. We do have cross-functional teams working to understand the legislation and to prepare for the removal of news on our platforms, yes.
Thank you, Ms. Curran.
I have been explaining, as a person who was in business for over 30 years, that if the government brings in a plan that says, if you allow the sharing of news links, you have to pay, a business reaction that is logical is to say, then I won't allow the sharing of news links so I don't have to pay. Mr. Chan, does that seem like a logical business decision?
That is an eminently logical conclusion, ma'am.
So with this new policy, or talked about policy at the Liberal Convention about misinformation, and it says here there will be money available, public funds to support this. Would Meta be at the table for money from the Liberal Party if this policy becomes law through the Liberal government?
Thank you, Mr. Waugh. If there are government funds on offer to Meta, we would apply for those. Absolutely.
Yes.